What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. The smiling man who followed Emmy home every night at 2:17 a.m. He is standing in my bedroom doorway right now. Not on the street anymore. Not at the corner 3 houses down. Not under the amber light of the street lamp on Arden Avenue that I have walked beneath 1,000 times without fear. In my doorway, his coat, his posture, that smile. To understand how we arrived here, to understand why I am writing this instead of screaming, we need to go back to the beginning. Consider, if you are capable of doing so without the comfort of familiar scale, what it means for a thing to wait. Not the waiting of a predator in the grass. That is patience with biology behind it, hunger as its engine, a finite patience that ends when the hunger is fed. I do not mean that. What I mean is something categorically different. Something for which our language was not designed, because the concept predates language by eons, so vast they lose all meaning if you try to hold them in a mind that has not been adequately prepared for the exercise. I mean a waiting that stretches back before the first human foot fell on unfrosted earth, before the first human mouth opened to form the first syllable of the first word in the first human language. I mean a waiting that has existed since before humanity was even an interesting mistake. It was here before we built our cities. It watched us lay the first stone upon the second stone and call it architecture. It watched us learn to make fire, to make bread, to make war. It watched empires rise in the old warm latitudes of the world and watched them fold back into the earth like dried flowers pressed between pages. It has no opinion of this. It does not celebrate our collapses. It does not mourn them. To ascribe to it any emotion that a human face might wear would be an error of such fundamental scale that the philosopher who made it should, by rights, never trust their own perception again. It simply persists. What the folklorists have cataloged across 14 cultures and 3 major language groups, and what the researchers at the University of Edinburgh's Anomalous Behavior Unit first collated in 1987 before their funding was abruptly terminated by the university board without explanation, is a phenomenon for which the clinical literature offers no satisfying taxonomy. They have used many words: pareidolia, mass psychogenic illness, cultural contagion. These are words that mean, translated into honesty, we do not know. And we are afraid of what we do not know, and we would very much like for it to stop. Dr. Nadia Vaslov, Anthropological Research Fellow, Edinburgh, 1987. Across every account we examined, 42 separate instances spanning 6 continents and 4 centuries, the same figure appears. Same posture, same coat, same expression on the face. When I asked my colleague whether he believed the accounts were connected, he laughed. 6 months later, he submitted his resignation and moved to a farmhouse in the Orkneys. He does not answer correspondence. Here is the fact that exists beneath all other facts in this account, the bedrock on which the horror sits. The smiling man is not a product of your century. He is not a product of the internet age, nor of the particular anxieties of late-night urban living, nor of the collective imagination of a frightened generation that has turned its nighttime fears into stories. He appears in a pamphlet printed in Edinburgh in 1743, in the marginalia of a nun's diary found in a convent outside Lyon in 1891, in the testimony of a lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland in 1922, and in 11 documented police reports filed in 7 American cities between 1964 and 2003. In every single account, the witness reports the same thing. The smile is not threatening. It is not aggressive. It is not the smile of something that wishes you harm. It is patient. It is waiting for something that has not yet arrived. And in every single account, without exception, by the time the witness reported the encounter to authorities, to family members, to anyone who would listen. The smiling man had already begun to move closer to where they slept. This is where the story of Marcus Webb begins. On a Tuesday in October, on a street called Arden Avenue, under an amber streetlight that will never feel safe to him again. The horror that found Marcus Webb is older than the street he walks, older than the city, older than the language he uses to describe it. It was waiting on Arden Avenue long before Marcus Webb had a name. It simply had not yet decided that he was interesting. Marcus Webb was 33 years old, worked as a copy editor for a mid-sized insurance company on the 14th floor of the Prescott Building downtown, drank 1 beer on weeknights and 2 on Fridays, and had walked the same 12 blocks home from the Riordan Street bus stop every night for 3 years without incident. He was a creature of magnificent, boring habit, and he loved it. He genuinely loved it, the particular pleasure of knowing exactly what the next 20 minutes of your life looks like. Right off the bus, south down Riordan past the Walgreens that always smelled inexplicably of sandalwood, left on Fuller, right on Monroe, and then the long last stretch of Arden Avenue that ended at his building, number 1147, second floor. The apartment with the busted bathroom fan that he kept meaning to call his landlord about, and never did. He listened to podcasts on the walk, true crime stuff mostly, which his sister Rachel thought was ironic for reasons she considered hilarious, and he considered annoying. He ate the same 3 lunches on rotation: turkey wrap, pasta salad, soup from the cart on the corner of Prescott and Vine, run by a man named Harold who always looked mildly disappointed in whatever Marcus ordered. He had a cat named Patterson, gray and imperious, who treated Marcus with the specific contempt only a cat can fully deliver. He was, in every meaningful way, fine. That was what Marcus would tell you about himself if you asked, and he'd mean it without any sadness about it. He was 33 and fine, and he had a good life in a boring city and a cat who disliked him and a coffee maker with a broken carafe that he'd superglued back together 3 times. And some nights, he stood at the kitchen window with his second weeknight beer and felt something approaching genuine contentment with the whole arrangement. On the night of October 14th, he was walking home at 2:20 a.m. Late, yes, there had been a going-away party for his colleague Dana Fritsch, who was leaving for a position in Portland. Marcus had stayed longer than he intended, which was unusual for him. He'd had 3 beers instead of 1, which was more unusual still. He'd missed the last express and taken the local, which dumped him at Riordan 12 minutes later than his customary arrival. He noticed none of this as significant. He put his earbuds in, pulled up an episode of the podcast, and turned left on Fuller toward Arden, thinking about whether Patterson would be waiting at the door or would ignore him as a punishment for being late. Patterson considered 11 p.m. late, and not thinking about very much else. He was on Arden, 40 feet from the corner, when he saw the man under the streetlight at the far end of the block. Just standing there, just a man in a dark coat standing under the amber pool of the light at the Arden-Mercer intersection, 300 feet away, standing very still, facing Marcus's direction. Marcus registered this the way you register a parked car or a mail collection box. It was there. It was a thing that existed, fine. He kept walking. He turned the podcast up slightly because it was getting to a good part. He passed the man, or rather he passed the end of the block where the man had been, because by the time Marcus reached it, the man was gone, which meant he had turned a corner or stepped into a doorway or gone into a building. There were 12 plausible explanations, and Marcus considered 0 of them because there was nothing to consider. A man on a street at night in a city was not a thing that required explanation. He went home. Patterson was at the door, deeply unimpressed. Marcus reheated leftover Chinese food and ate it standing at the counter and went to bed at 3 and slept without dreaming. He would not remember the man under the streetlight until he saw him again. The thing you need to understand about Marcus Webb: the thing that matters before any of the rest of it, is that he was someone people liked without entirely knowing why. He wasn't flashy about it. He didn't have the kind of personality that filled up a room when he walked in, wasn't the guy who always had a story, wasn't the one everyone was watching at the party. He was more like, okay, you know that feeling when you've been standing at a crowded party for 40 minutes holding a plastic cup and making small talk about someone's kitchen renovation, and then suddenly you're in a conversation that actually goes somewhere. That was Marcus. He was the conversation that actually went somewhere. He remembered things. Your sister's name, the job you'd applied for 3 months ago, the dog's surgery you'd mentioned once. He filed all of it away and brought it back with the offhand precision of someone who genuinely paid attention. His mother, Rose, was the sort of person who called weekly and meant it lovingly. His father, Carl, had died 6 years back, construction accident. Fast and without warning. The kind of death that leaves no time for the sentences you needed to say. And Marcus still sometimes picked up his phone to call him before remembering, which was a specific kind of grief that had no name. He had one close friend, a man named Devin Marsh who worked in IT security and lived across town and called Marcus once a week to argue about sports Marcus didn't watch, which was really both of them saying, "I'm still here. Are you still there?" He'd had a girlfriend named Paya for 4 years, up until 18 months ago. That had ended the way good relationships sometimes end, not with a catastrophe, just with two people realizing they had grown into shapes that no longer fit together. They still texted occasionally. She had a dog now. He was glad for her in the specific, quiet way you're glad for someone when you've moved past the part where being glad for them was hard. He was ordinary in the way that extraordinary things happen to ordinary people, which is to say, he was exactly the kind of person whose story becomes the kind of story I'm telling you right now. On October 18th, 4 days after the party, Marcus walked home from work at his usual time, 11:40 off the express bus, home by midnight, Patterson waiting with aggressive neutrality. It was a cold, clear night, the kind of October that smells like something ending and something else not yet started. He had his podcast in. He was thinking about a manuscript he'd been editing all day, a procedural manual for adjusters that made him quietly grateful his own life was not about adjusting claims. He turned left on Fuller. He turned right on Arden. The man was at the streetlight again. Same coat, dark, longish, belted loosely. Same posture, upright, relaxed, shoulders back, weight evenly distributed, the posture of a person who was exactly where they meant to be. And even at 300 feet, even with the amber light doing what amber light does to the geometry of a human face, even at that distance, Marcus could see the smile. Not a big smile, not a grinning at nothing crazy person smile, just a smile, settled and patient and entirely without context. Insomniac, Marcus thought. Night walker. Weirdo, probably, but a harmless weirdo. He thought about the guy who'd stood outside the Walgreens on Riordan every Tuesday for a year before Marcus finally figured out it was the building manager waiting for a delivery. He walked past. The man didn't move, didn't speak, didn't turn. At the door of his building, Marcus looked back. 300 feet of empty amberlit street. The man was gone. Marcus thought, and then turkey wrap tomorrow, and then he went inside. But that night before he fell asleep, he thought about the smile one more time, not in a worried way. Just noticed it the way you notice a word you don't recognize, held it up briefly, couldn't define it, set it down. He didn't notice that it was exactly 2:17 a.m. when he'd passed the light both times. He should have noticed that. By the 5th time, Marcus had a theory. Between October 18th and November 2nd, 14 nights of walking home, 11 of which were at his normal midnightish time and 3 of which were late, the way October sometimes gets late, he had seen the man 6 times, always at the Arden Mercer streetlight, always in the same coat, always in the same posture, always with that specific, unhurried, contextless smile. His theory was, The man was a resident of 1208 Arden, the apartment building on the north corner of Mercer, and he had insomnia, and he went outside to smoke or clear his head or whatever insomniacs do at 2 in the morning. And he happened to be the kind of person who stood very still and looked in whatever direction they were looking. Marcus found this theory completely satisfying. It explained every component of the phenomenon. It accounted for the regularity, the consistency of location, the late hour. It was clean and rational, and it made the universe sensible, which was all Marcus Webb really required of his theories. He was even a little charmed by it, my neighborhood insomniac, my local eccentric, in the mildly proprietary way you get attached to the fixtures of your commute. The disappointing soup cart guy, the woman on the bus who always fell asleep and then woke up startled at every stop, the insomniac on the corner with the inexplicable smile. He'd even thought about waving. Just once, a casual acknowledgement, the way you nod at the person in the parking garage you see every morning. I see you, you're real, we're both real good enough. He hadn't, though. Something about the stillness of the man made waving feel wrong in a way Marcus couldn't articulate, like humming in church. Then came November 3rd. The man wasn't at the Arden Mercer light. Marcus noticed this with a small, strange disappointment, like arriving at a restaurant and finding your usual table taken. He kept walking. He was 3/4 of the way down the block when he realized, with a physical sensation like missing the last stair in the dark, that the man was not absent. He was at the Arden Hillcroft light. 1 block closer to Marcus's building. Same coat, same posture, same smile. Okay, Marcus thought. Okay, so he moved. He lives on this side, apparently. Or he was just further down tonight. And he kept walking past the man who did not move, did not track Marcus's approach, just stood there, smiling at the middle distance. And he pushed into the lobby of his building, and he waited for the elevator, and he listened to his own heartbeat do something slightly unusual while he waited. He told himself, it's nothing. He got in the elevator and hit 2. The doors closed. He thought, when I walk to the Arden Mercer corner every night, I pass the Arden Hillcroft light on the way. I walk past it every night. 14 nights. And in all 14 of those nights, I have never once seen the man standing at the Hillcroft light. He thought, so why tonight? Why 1 block closer? He pressed his back to the elevator wall. The doors opened at 2. Patterson was waiting in the hall, which Patterson never did, which meant Marcus had forgotten to put food out before work. Sorry, buddy, Marcus said. He went inside. He fed the cat. He sat on the couch and turned on the TV and watched 20 minutes of a home renovation show without absorbing a single second of it. And then he turned the TV off and sat in the silence and thought about the way the man had been smiling at nothing at all. It's 1 block, he told himself. A man walked 1 block in 2 weeks. Call the authorities. He laughed out loud at himself. It echoed in the quiet apartment. Patterson looked at him from across the room with eyes that contained, Marcus had always thought, entirely too much knowledge. Marcus Webb had always been someone who did the sensible thing, not out of cowardice. He was clear on that distinction. But because the sensible thing was almost always the correct thing, and the dramatic alternative was almost always the thing people regretted. So when he came home on November 7th and the man was standing at the Arden Hillcroft light again, and when Marcus looked at his phone on a whim, and the time read 2:17 a.m., and when he found himself thinking that's interesting, that's the same time it always is, he did not stop to interrogate that. He went home. He told Patterson about it in the absent-minded way people talk to cats, and Patterson ignored him and sat in the window, and Marcus went to bed. He did not call Devin. He did not call Rachel. He did not write it down. What he did, and this is the decision, this is the one, the wrong door, the thing he would replay later from every angle looking for the place where he could have chosen differently. What he did was look up the man on his phone. He Googled smiling man standing under streetlight. He thought it would bring up nothing, or bring up some forum post about a local eccentric, or bring up a neighborhood watch forum arguing about whether he was a nuisance. What it brought up instead was a Reddit thread with 47,000 upvotes. He read it at 3 a.m. with his phone 2 inches from his face in his dark bedroom. He read it the way you read something that starts out seeming unrelated to you, and then, sentence by sentence, starts feeling more and more like a document written specifically about your life. The original post was from a user named HollowTide99 in a city Marcus had never visited. 3 years ago, the post was called, "I think the smiling man has been following me, and I need to know if anyone else has seen him." Marcus read it twice. Then he read the comments, 4,200 of them, for 2 hours. At 5 a.m., he put the phone down on his chest and stared at the ceiling. The comments were from 31 cities, 4 countries, people who had seen a man, the same man, standing still and smiling under streetlights at night, always close to the commute, always closer than the previous time, always and without a single exception at 2:17 in the morning. There was a comment from a user called Willow Spruce 47 that read, "I stopped walking home. I took cabs for 6 months. Then one night I looked out my window at 2:17 and he was in the parking lot across the street. You can't change the route. You can only change how far away you are from a window." Marcus didn't sleep. The morning came in cold and gray, and he went to work, and he thought about what Willow Spruce 47 had said. You can only change how far away you are from a window. He thought about that all day, and here's the thing, the part nobody talks about, the part left out of every news report, every official account, every interview, because the people who knew, the ones who were actually there, made a decision. They decided some things were better left unsaid. They were wrong, and tonight you're going to hear why. And here is the part nobody talks about, the part left out of every news report, every official account, every interview, because the people who knew, the ones who were actually there, made a decision. They decided some things were better left unsaid. They were wrong, and tonight you're going to hear why. There was a photograph on the refrigerator. Marcus had put it there 2 years ago. Him and Devin and Rachel at Devin's 4th of July party, all 3 of them squinting into the sun, laughing at something that had been funny then and that Marcus could no longer remember. He looked at it every morning when he reached for the milk. On November 9th, the photograph was upside down. Marcus looked at it for a moment. He thought, "I must have knocked it." He turned it right side up. He drank his coffee. He left for work. When he came home that night, the photograph was upside down again. He stood in front of it for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Patterson was somewhere in the back in the bedroom, which was unusual. Patterson preferred the front room in the evenings, the warm patch of carpet near the radiator. Marcus called the cat's name. There was no answer. He turned the photograph over. He set his keys on the counter. He checked the back door, which was locked, had always been locked, showed no signs of being anything other than locked. He told himself he must have knocked it again, coming in. He made dinner, he ate it, he washed the plate. In the morning, the photograph was upside down. He took it off the refrigerator and put it in a kitchen drawer. He did not tell anyone about this because there was nothing to tell. A photograph that moved was not a sentence that went anywhere useful. He could hear, with very little effort, exactly how Devin would respond to it, and the sound of Devin's hypothetical laughter was enough to close the subject. But the drawer bothered him. Not the photograph in the drawer itself, because the kitchen drawer had been stuck for 8 months. The bottom runner had come off its track, and the drawer would open only 3 inches before it caught. Marcus had gotten used to this, had developed the precise wrist angle required to extract things from the 3-inch gap. He had put the photograph in the drawer because the drawer was effectively sealed. When he came home from work on November 11th, the drawer was open, all the way, smooth and easy on its runners as though it had always worked. The photograph was not in it. It was back on the refrigerator, upside down. Patterson came out of the bedroom and sat in the middle of the kitchen floor and looked at Marcus with the steady, readable expression of an animal that has been waiting for you to catch up. Marcus called his building superintendent, a man named Gerald, who was not unkind but was the sort of person who found alternate explanations the way some people find loose change. Gerald checked the locks, all fine. Gerald looked at the drawer and demonstrated its operation. It worked perfectly smoothly without issue, and when Gerald tried to replicate the old catch point he couldn't, and he looked at Marcus with the expression of a man professionally committed to his own patients. "Maybe you just got lucky," Gerald said. "Tracks settle sometimes." Marcus thanked him. Gerald left. The drawer worked perfectly for the remaining 20 minutes. Marcus stood in the kitchen looking at it. And then, in the morning, he tried it again, and it caught at 3 inches exactly as it always had. He didn't call anyone. He started paying attention to the apartment the way you pay attention to a person who has said something odd, not alarmed attention, just heightened attention, the low hum of noticing. He noticed that the bathroom door, which had always swung open when unlatched, now rested in the closed position. He didn't think he'd been latching it. He noticed that the kitchen window, which he opened each evening to air out cooking smells, was no longer open in the mornings. Someone, himself presumably, was closing it in his sleep. He noticed that Patterson had stopped sitting in the front window and had begun sitting in the hallway, facing the door, which Patterson had never done before, not once in 3 years. He told himself these were small things. He told himself he was primed, hypervigilant, running every neutral detail through the filter of anxiety the Reddit thread had installed. He was a copy editor. He noticed patterns. He was connecting dots that made no picture. He called Devin on November 13th and did not mention any of it. They talked about basketball for 35 minutes. Marcus felt, briefly, completely normal. That night he walked home at 11:50. The Arden Hillcroft light was empty. The Arden Mercer light was empty. He passed them both, feeling the particular relief of a person who had decided they'd been worrying about nothing. His building came into view. The lobby light was on. The second floor window, his window, was lit, which meant he'd left the lamp on, which he sometimes did. He stopped. He had not left the lamp on. He was certain of this the way you are certain of your name, not thought through, just known. He turned off the lamp every morning. He had turned it off this morning. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold and looked up at his lit window, and he could see, from the street, the shape of the lamp on its table in the exact position it had always been in. But between him and the lamp in the window, facing the street, facing him, there was a silhouette. It was smiling. What you just heard was only the beginning. Jackson Wright Arrow Masterton Bridge. She noticed it on a Tuesday. 3 days later, it had a name in a police report. Marcus went to the police on November 14th. He told the desk officer what he'd seen. He was careful. He did not say the smiling man. He said an unidentified individual who appeared to have entered his apartment. He described the silhouette at the window. He described the photograph. The desk officer took notes. She was professional and unhurried, and she asked good questions, and Marcus appreciated that, and he felt himself thinking this was the right thing to do. This is how things get resolved. 2 officers came to the apartment that afternoon. They found no sign of forced entry. They found the drawer working perfectly. The photograph was right side up in its place on the refrigerator. Marcus had not put it back and was fairly certain he had left it in the drawer. But the drawer was catching at 3 inches again. So wherever the photograph had been before the officers arrived, it was back on the refrigerator now, right side up, as though it had always been there, as though nothing had ever been wrong at all. One of the officers, a young man whose name tag said Driscoll, stood at the front window and looked out at the street and said, "You have a good view of the sidewalk from here." He said it as a neutral observation. Marcus said yes. Officer Driscoll said, "Did you consider that what you saw in the window, the silhouette, might have been your own reflection? The glass does that sometimes at certain angles." Marcus said that he had considered it, yes. Officer Driscoll said they would file an incident report and increase patrol frequency on the block for the next 2 weeks. They left. Marcus stood in his apartment. The lamp was where it had always been. The photograph was right side up. Patterson was in the front room on the warm patch of carpet in his preferred spot, acting as though the last 3 days had been entirely unremarkable. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Marcus sat down on the couch and looked at the front window and felt, with perfect clarity, that something was now irrevocably different about the quality of the room's silence, and that the difference had nothing to do with him. Masterton Right Arrow King Bridge. The file ends there. What it cannot record is what happened inside Marcus Webb's chest when he read it, the specific weight of knowing that someone had survived this before him and told no one. November 3 RD 2019, 11:59 p.m. The night Marcus Webb first noticed the smiling man at the Arden Hillcroft light, rather than the Arden Mercer light, Officer Tamara Reyes of the 14th Precinct was filing her third report in 14 days involving an unidentified male, dark coat, standing at or near residential streetlights in the Arden Avenue corridor. None of those 3 reports had produced an identification. None had produced a photograph. None had produced a response from the department beyond standard documentation and a note in the corridor's community policing file. The first report came from David Anscombe, 41, accountant, 1109 Arden Avenue, November 1st, filed at 8 a.m., covering observations made the previous 3 nights at 2:17 a.m. Anscombe reported seeing the same male individual on 3 consecutive nights, each time approximately 1 block closer to his residence than the previous time. He described a dark coat, a relaxed stance, and he noted with evident discomfort in his verbal account, a smile that didn't seem to go away. Anscombe asked whether his home had any reported security incidents. It had not. Anscombe moved out of his apartment on November 22nd. He declined to say where he was going. The second report came from Myril Tran, 29, graduate student, 1133 Arden Avenue, November 2nd, same description, same time, 2 nights of observation. Tran added one detail that Anscombe had not. The individual appeared to have been aware of her observation and had not reacted to it in any way. "He wasn't looking at me exactly," Tran told Officer Reyes. "He was looking in my direction. There's a difference." When asked if she felt threatened, Tran paused for 12 seconds before answering. "Not yet," she said. Myril Tran stopped attending her university program in December 2019. Her academic advisor filed a welfare check in January 2020. She was found in her apartment, physically unharmed, and told the officer that she was fine and that she simply didn't feel safe going outside before it got light. Witness David Anscombe, accountant, 1109 Arden Avenue, 2019. "I know how it sounds. I know exactly how it sounds, and I don't care anymore how it sounds. 3 nights in a row. Same man, same spot, except the spot kept changing. Closer, every night closer. And the thing nobody is going to believe, the thing I couldn't say to the cop without watching her write it down in that specific way, is that he was smiling the whole time. Not at me, not at anything. Just smiling, the way a face smiles when it's been arranged that way and nobody told the eyes." David Anscombe moved to a property in rural Vermont in December 2019. He has not returned to Arden Avenue. He does not discuss the incident. His sister describes him as different since that fall, quieter in a way that isn't calm. The third report, the one filed on November 14th on behalf of Marcus Webb, was the 12th documented sighting of the same individual in the Arden Avenue corridor in 2019. The first had been filed in February. It remained open. It had no assigned detective. It had no photograph. The suspect had never been physically stopped or identified. He had simply been there, and then slightly closer, and then closer still. February 8th, 2019, 2:17 a.m. 9 months before Marcus Webb saw a silhouette in his window, a woman named Helen Park, 38, walked home along Arden Avenue from a late shift at St. Catherine's Hospital, where she worked as a charge nurse. She saw the man under the Arden Mercer light. She filed a report. The report is on record. What the report contains, and I am going to tell you exactly what it contains because you need to hear this, is a 12-point description that matches, with no deviations, the accounts filed by every subsequent witness in the corridor throughout the rest of that year. Dark coat still posture the smile. And one additional detail that no other witness included, and that Officer Gerald Maines, who took Park's report, flagged with a handwritten asterisk in the margin. Helen Park reported that as she passed the man, she felt cold. Not the ambient cold of a February night, a localized cold, the specific cold of standing next to an open freezer. She had mentioned this not as a phenomenon to be explained, she told Maines, but simply as something that happened and that she felt the report should accurately reflect. Maines flagged it with an asterisk. He didn't know what to do with it. He noted it. Helen Park saw the man again on February 15th, on Arden Hillcroft, 1 block closer to her apartment. On February 19th, she saw him standing at the corner of her building. On February 21st, she saw him through her living room window, standing in the parking structure opposite her building, on level 2, visible from her third-floor apartment. She filed a report each time. She changed the locks. She had a friend stay over for a week. Witness Helen Park, charge nurse, 1189 Arden Avenue, 2019. I want to be clear about something. I'm a medical professional. I've worked nights in an ER for 11 years. I've seen things that are genuinely frightening, actual emergencies, actual violence, and I know the difference between something that's frightening and something that's wrong. What I want you to understand is that the man on my street was not frightening. He was wrong. Those are different things. Frightening means you want to run. Wrong means your body isn't sure what direction to run in. I stood at my window at 2:17 in the morning and I watched him standing in that parking structure. And he was wrong in a way I still don't have language for, and I want that on record. Helen Park transferred to a hospital in another city in March 2019. She has given one subsequent interview on the subject in 2021 and terminated it after 4 minutes. She has not been reached for further comment. The reason for her transfer listed in her personnel file is personal circumstances requiring relocation. Helen Park's February reports, all 6 of them, were reviewed by a supervisor and classified under non-actionable nuisance surveillance. The file was not connected to subsequent Arden Avenue reports filed later in the year. The connection was made by a civilian researcher in 2022. The researcher is Nora Casson, 44. I will tell you what happened to Nora Casson later. The folklore is old. This is documented. This is not inference. This is cross-indexed record. In 1743, a broadsheet printed in Edinburgh described a figure called the Lingering Smiler, reported by night workers along the Canongate during a winter of particular cold. The figure was described as a man or man-shaped, the broadsheet hedged, standing near outdoor lanterns late at night, always smiling, always still, always, witnesses agreed, a little closer to your home than the last time you'd seen him. The broadsheet treated it as curiosity, a joke for literate city dwellers to pass at tables. There were 17 documented attacks on Canongate residents that winter. The records of those attacks, and I found these in the National Records of Scotland, Edinburgh, accessible with a research appointment, list no suspects identified, no perpetrators apprehended. 14 victims were found injured in their homes with no signs of forced entry. 2 died. One was a man named James Alver, a chandler of 44 Canongate. who had reportedly complained to a neighbor in the week before his death that a figure had been standing closer and closer to his home each night, smiling at him. The neighbor dismissed it. James Alver died on a Wednesday. He was found by the neighbor on Thursday morning. The door was locked from the inside. Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, June 1977. 4 reports filed within a 6-week window. Same description. Rural context. A man seen on a county road near mailboxes, near driveways. Always late, always closer. One of the 4 reporting families left the area by September 1977. Their farmhouse was sold below market value. The realtor who handled the sale, a woman named Karen Spice, told a local reporter in 1992 that the family would not say exactly why they were leaving, only that they didn't feel safe sleeping near windows. Dr. Solomon Brecht, Comparative Mythology, Temple University, 2020. When I map the accounts chronologically, what you find is not a viral legend. Viral legends evolve. They mutate from host to host. They pick up details and shed others. This thing doesn't mutate. The coat, the stillness, the smile, the approach pattern. The time 2:17 a.m. appears in accounts separated by 250 years. That is not viral propagation. That is a stable phenomenon. And stable phenomena in my field have one explanation. They are either real or they are recorded from something real. Those 2 explanations are ultimately the same explanation. In 2019, in the Arden Avenue corridor of a mid-sized American city, the phenomenon was operating on a 12-person confirmation cluster. The reports were filed. The reports were not connected. Nobody asked the pattern's most important question. How close does he need to get before something happens? What I am about to tell you is documented. It is on record. It exists in files that are technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them. I read every page. You need to hear what is inside, because what happened once is still happening. What I am about to tell you is documented. It is on record. It exists in files that are technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them. I read every page. You need to hear what is inside, because what happened once is still happening. Masterton Right Arrow King Bridge. The file ends there. What it cannot record is what happened inside Marcus Webb's chest when he read it. The specific weight of knowing that someone had survived this before him and told no one. By the end of November, Marcus had stopped sleeping in full nights. He slept in chunks 3 hours before midnight, a doze after 4 a.m., a few hours in the gray morning when the city was loud enough to feel present. His body was adapting in the specific, competent way bodies adapt to conditions they do not like. And Marcus was aware of this adaptation in the way you're aware of a bad situation you've decided not to fully examine. I'm tired, yes, but I'm functional. I'm doing what needs doing, I'm fine. He was not fine. The podcast had stopped. He couldn't have real things in his ears on the walk home anymore. He needed to hear the street. He walked with his phone in his hand and he checked the time before he turned onto Arden, and he told himself he was checking because of the bus schedule. And he knew that was a lie, and he checked anyway. He had started tracking the man's position with the same systematic rigor he gave to everything important. A note in his phone, each night, time and location. Arden Mercer. Arden Hillcroft. Then a gap of 3 nights where there had been no sighting, and Marcus felt so grateful he'd actually breathed out something that might have been a laugh. Then, the corner of Arden and Prescott, 2 blocks from his building. Then, the fire hydrant in front of 1163 Arden, 3 houses down from his. Then, and this was the night Marcus stood in the lobby for 11 minutes before he could make himself press the elevator button. The man was standing at the base of the stairs to 1147 Arden. Marcus's building. He'd had to walk past him. There was no other entrance. The building had 1 door and the man was 8 feet from it, in the narrow alley of shadow between streetlight pools, standing perfectly still in the dark coat with the patient, sourceless, terrible smile. He's going to say something, Marcus thought as he approached. He's going to say my name. He was certain of this with a certainty that had no rational foundation and that he could not shake, and he walked past, and the man said nothing, and Marcus pressed the lobby button and rode the elevator and stood in his apartment in his coat with his keys in his hand for 3 full minutes before he could move. His thought process had reached what he recognized as an operational limit. The part of his brain that had been filing this under eccentric neighbor, overactive imagination, ambient anxiety had met, in the form of a man standing at the foot of his own building steps, an argument it couldn't counter. He called Devin that night, late. "Someone is following me," he said. Devin said, "What?" in the voice Devin used when something had just gotten unambiguously serious. Marcus told him everything. Devin listened without interruption, which was unusual. Devin interrupted everything. When Marcus stopped, Devin was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Stay somewhere else tonight. My couch. Come now." Marcus thought about it. He thought about the man standing 8 feet from his door. He thought about the Reddit thread in Willow Spruce 47, and you can only change how far away you are from a window. He thought about Helen Park and her transfer, and David Anscombe and his rural Vermont property, and James Alver, Chandler of Edinburgh, who died in a locked house in 1743 after a man stood smiling outside his door for several weeks in a cold winter. He said, "I'll be fine." Devin said, "Marcus." "I'll call you tomorrow," Marcus said. "I'll be fine." He hung up. He sat in his apartment. He thought, "I cannot actually leave. Not tonight. Not yet. Because if he left and something happened to his things, if the photograph moved again, if the drawer fixed itself again, he needed to know. He needed documentation. He needed to understand the mechanism of what was happening to him before he could counter it. He was a copy editor. He worked with logic and evidence. He was going to apply logic and evidence to this, and it was going to resolve into something he could act on. He opened his laptop at 1:30 a.m. and started cross-referencing every account on the Reddit thread with publicly available incident reports he could find online. He found the Edinburgh broadsheet at 2:10 a.m. He closed the laptop at 2:15 a.m. and sat in his dark apartment, and at 2:17 he heard from the street, from directly below his second-floor window, a very quiet, very patient sound. He did not go to the window. He realized, sitting there, that he had not gone to the window, that his body had made that decision for him, that his body knew something his brain was still in the process of understanding. He stayed perfectly still, perfectly silent. At 2:22 a.m. the sound stopped. He didn't sleep. Devin came over the next morning. Marcus had not asked him to. Devin had simply shown up at 8 a.m. with coffee and bagels, and the particular look on his face that Marcus associated with the 3 times in their 12-year friendship that Devin had decided to show up without warning because he decided it was necessary. The time Marcus's father died. The time Marcus and Paya broke up. And now. Devin sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table and looked at him. "When did you last sleep?" Devin asked. "I sleep fine," Marcus said. Devin's expression communicated that this was not a good answer, and they were going to be here for a while. He told Devin everything, more than the phone call, the full version, the Edinburgh broadsheet and the Edinburgh deaths, and the Dauphin County reports, and Nora Casson, who he had found mentioned in a 2022 community blog post as the person who connected the Arden Avenue reports, and then not found mentioned anywhere since. He told Devin about the noise below the window, about the drawer, about Patterson's new habit of sitting in the hallway facing the door. Devin listened. Devin was good at listening when the subject matter was serious. He had the IT security professional's habit of absorbing information before reacting to it, which Marcus had always found reassuring. When Marcus finished, Devin said, "Okay, you're staying with me until this is resolved. Tonight, bring Patterson." Devin, "Marcus, listen to me. Devin put both hands flat on the table. Whatever is happening, whether it's a person with a psychological issue, or a person with bad intentions, or whatever the explanation turns out to be, you are not helping it by staying alone in this apartment. You come stay with me. I have a guest room. Patterson can destroy my furniture. We call the police again with a documented escalation pattern. And we figure this out from a position that isn't you alone in this apartment at 2 a.m. It was the most sensible thing anyone had said to Marcus in weeks. He felt, sitting across from Devin in the morning light with hot coffee in his hands and a bagel on a plate in front of him and his oldest friend's steady, practical face on the other side of the table. He felt for the first time in a long time that this was a problem with a solution, that he was not alone in it, that the logic and evidence approach was going to work, and he had someone to work it with. "Okay," he said, "tonight I'll pack a bag." Devin stayed for 2 hours. They made a list. They found the contact information for Nora Casson, the researcher, and found a Facebook profile that hadn't been updated since October 2022. They found a local journalist named Pete Ahern who had written a short piece about the Arden Avenue reports in November 2019 and had not written a follow-up. They wrote down both names to contact in the morning. They had a plan. Devin left at noon. He hugged Marcus at the door. "Tonight," he said, "text me when you're leaving." "Tonight," Marcus agreed. That evening, Marcus packed a bag. He put Patterson's carrier on the counter. He was going to leave at 10 before midnight, before any of this became relevant. At 9:45 p.m. his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered. There was no voice, there was no breathing, there was only. From the other end of the line, a sound he recognized with a physical impact he felt in his sternum. The quiet, rhythmic, patient sound he had heard below his window at 2:17 a.m. Not the sound of a voice, not the sound of movement, just the sound of something waiting. He stood with the phone pressed to his ear in his packed apartment, while the sound continued for 43 seconds, and then stopped, and the line went dead. His hands were shaking when he put the phone down. He picked up his bag, he picked up Patterson's carrier, he went to the door. He opened it. The hallway was empty. The elevator was at his floor, doors already open. He stood in his doorway and looked at the elevator and thought, Devin's place, 10 minutes, get in the elevator. He thought about the noise from the phone. He thought about 2:17 a.m. and the sound below the window. He thought about you can only change how far away you are from a window. He put down the bag. He closed his door. He didn't know why. He still doesn't know why. He told Devin later that it felt like a decision he had already made, somewhere underneath the part of him that thought it was still making decisions. He put Patterson's carrier away. He unpacked the bag. He sat on the couch and waited for 2:17 a.m. At 2:15 a.m., Marcus turned off every light in the apartment and went to the window. He stood to the side of the window frame, not in front of it, not in the glass, and he looked down at Arden Avenue. The man was there. Not 8 feet from the steps this time, not at the fire hydrant, not at the corner. He was standing directly in front of Marcus's building, on the sidewalk below the second-floor windows, looking up. And this is where the language starts to break down. This is where even Marcus Webb, a man who worked with words for a living, a man who made a professional practice of precision, found himself saying, I don't know how to tell you what I saw, here is what Marcus saw. The man was taller than he remembered. Not impossibly tall, not a thing from a story. Just taller than a normal man, in the specific way that you don't register until the context removes every other possible explanation for the scale of what you're seeing. He was standing on a flat sidewalk with no optical tricks available, and he was taller than the parked cars and taller than the mailbox at the building's corner. And when Marcus's mind tried to assign him the 6-foot height of an ordinary person, and to make the geometry work, it failed, and kept failing. and the failure was accumulating in Marcus's chest as something cold and bright. The coat, the stillness, he'd been expecting those, he'd been prepared. He had not been prepared for the eyes. He'd never been close enough to see the eyes before. He was looking down from his window at an angle in the half-light of the street at a distance of 20 feet, and he could see the eyes. They were open. They were facing up, facing Marcus. And he would tell Devin about this later, and Devin would not entirely believe him, and Marcus would not entirely blame Devin. They were entirely, completely, absolutely dark. Not dark-like. Brown eyes in shadow. Dark like the absence of the thing that makes eyes eyes. Dark the way the space in a keyhole is dark, or the way a window is dark when there is nothing on the other side of it. But the smile was the same, exactly the same. Patient, settled, contextless. Waiting for something. Marcus stood at the side of his window and looked down at the man, and the man looked up at Marcus. And Marcus thought, in the cracking, pre-rational part of his mind that had been trying to tell him something for 3 weeks, he thought, he's done. He's close enough. He's where he was trying to get to. He looked down at the man, and the man looked up at him, and Marcus thought, now what happens? The man's smile widened. Just slightly, just by degrees. And the thing that Marcus would not be able to explain to Devin or to the police or to anyone who ever asked him about this night was that the widening of the smile was not a human expression, not in its mechanics. A human smile widens from the corners of the mouth, muscles pulling in specific directions, a readable and familiar anatomy. This widened from the center. The smile opened like a door. Marcus stepped back from the window. What you just heard was only the beginning. King Right Arrow Poe Bridge. That was the last normal thought he would have. I do not use the word normal lightly. I use it the way one might use the word sure while watching it disappear behind you. He called Devin at 2:19 a.m. Devin answered on the second ring, which meant Devin had not been sleeping. They talked for 2 hours. Devin wanted to come over immediately. Marcus talked him out of it, and the reason he talked him out of it was that he had looked out his window at 2:30 and the man was gone, and the street was empty, and in the absence of the immediate thing, the adrenaline had ebbed enough for Marcus to feel the full weight of his own exhaustion, which was considerable. He's gone, Marcus said. I'm going to sleep, come in the morning. Devin came at 7. Marcus was awake. He had technically been in bed between 4 and 7, but the word sleep would be overselling it. They sat in the kitchen, and Marcus showed Devin the tracking notes on his phone. Devin's expression, as he scrolled through the documentation, the dates, the locations, the 2:17 a.m. timestamps, the notes on Helen Park and the Edinburgh broadsheet, went through several phases that Marcus noted with the analytical attention of someone who has very little energy left for his own emotional processing. The eyes, Devin said just that. The eyes, Marcus confirmed. Devin put the phone down. He looked at Marcus with the careful look of someone measuring a distance. I want to say this carefully, Devin said. I want to say it in a way that doesn't sound like I think you're. Say it, Marcus said. Is there any possibility, any at all, that what you're experiencing is stress-related? Not the man. I believe you about the man. He's on 3 police reports. He's real. But the way the face looked from the window, the way the smile, Devin stopped. The Edinburgh stuff. You were at your computer at 2 a.m. reading documents about people dying, and then 20 minutes later you're at a window in the dark looking down at a person you'd already decided was connected to those documents. Is there any? The drawer, Marcus said. Devin was quiet. The drawer that doesn't open opened. The photograph moved. The drawer closed again before you got here. Patterson changed behavior 3 weeks before I told him anything. And the phone call. Marcus folded his hands on the table. I don't think I'm losing it, Devin. I think something is losing it on my behalf. Devin stayed all day. They contacted Pete Ahern, the journalist. His email bounced. They found a working number for Nora Casson and left a voicemail, and she did not return it. They looked at the Facebook profile that had stopped updating in October 2022 and found that her last post was a photograph of the Arden Avenue corridor at night, taken from a parked car, showing the Arden-Mercer streetlight. There was a figure under it. Dark coat, still posture. Even at photograph resolution, at that distance, in that light, the smile. Nora Casson's last post had no caption, just the photograph. October 14th, 2022, 22 likes. Marcus looked at it for a long time. He thought about the warm kitchen and Devon across the table, and the cat in the front room and his job on the 14th floor of the Prescott building, and the lunch cart with the disappointed Harold and the podcast he hadn't listened to in 3 weeks. He thought about all of it, all the ordinary, warm, specific, unremarkable fabric of his life, and he understood, with the precise clarity of a person who has just been shown their own exit, that he was already past the boundary of the normal life. He had crossed it without a sign. There had been no ceremony. The thought plain and final as a checked box: there is no exit, there never was. You will think me mad. You are perhaps already composing that conclusion, already settling into the comfortable chair of disbelief, pulling around you the warm blanket of rationalism that insists there is always an explanation, always a simpler answer, always the hinge of the ordinary waiting to be found if one looks with sufficient care. I will not insult you by pretending to certainty I no longer possess. I will only tell you what I perceived, what I experienced, and allow you to conduct, in the privacy of your own mind, whatever revision of my account satisfies the requirements of your particular piece. It began with sound. This is the thing I cannot, with all the will I can marshal in the assembly of this account. This is the thing I cannot explain away. Not the man on the street, not the photograph that moved, not the drawer that opened and would not open and opened again. Those things accumulated and were terrible in their accumulation. But it was the sound that first introduced the question that has not left me since, the question that sits across from me now in every silent room I occupy, the question of whether what I was perceiving was the external world, or whether the external world had, by some mechanism I am not equipped to describe, begun to move through me. The sound was, it is difficult. The sound was like water under pressure, no. The sound was like breathing, no. These approximations collapse the moment I apply them. What I will say is this: it was rhythmic, and it was patient, and it was present in a way that suggested great duration, as though it had been sounding long before I became able to hear it, as though the hearing of it was not its beginning, merely my introduction. I heard it first on the street, below the window, at the hour I had come to know. I heard it next, and here you may reach for your blanket of rationalism, I expect it, inside the apartment. Not from the window, not from the street, from inside, from behind the bathroom door which was closed, from a room in which, I can assure you, I was absolutely certain there was nothing capable of producing sound. I opened the door. The bathroom was empty, the sound was not. Do you understand what I am telling you? The sound did not cease when I opened the door. It did not come from the pipe or the wall or the vent in the ceiling. It was in the air of the room, ambient, distributed, sourceless, and it did not change when I entered, did not accelerate or quiet, did not react to my presence in any way. It simply was. I stood in the bathroom for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I checked my watch. I noted the time. I am not the kind of person who fails to note the time. And the sound continued without variation. And then it stopped. And the silence that followed it was different, was the silence of something finished rather than the silence of something absent. And I stood in the bathroom with my hand on the door, and I asked myself, was that real? I have asked myself that question every day since. I have not been able to answer it. The inability to answer it is, I have come to understand precisely the point. I began, and I tell you this with the frankness of someone who no longer has the luxury of shame, I began to keep records. Not of the man, not of the physical incidents, not of the documentation I had so methodically assembled. I began to keep records of my own mind, its reliability, its consistency, its competence as an instrument of perception. I set tasks for myself, small tasks, calibrations. I placed objects in fixed positions and checked them. I noted everything I could see from each window at every hour. I tested my memory rigorously. Could I recall, precisely, the position of the chair when I had left the room? Could I recall the exact words of the last sentence I had read before putting down the book? Could I trust the inventory of my own perceptions? The answer was yes. The answer was always yes. And yet, this was the thing that gnawed. The very act of testing implied the possibility of failure. And the more rigorously I tested, the more present the possibility of failure became, not in my actual performance, which was, I insist, impeccable, but in my consciousness of the possibility. The ground of certainty was not sinking, but I was becoming aware acutely, perpetually aware that ground could sink, that it had a floor, that below the floor there was nothing. The sound appeared in my dreams. Not the man did not enter my dreams. It was the sound, the patient, rhythmic, pressured sound that I had heard in the bathroom, in the street below the window, on the telephone. It appeared in my dreams not as a threatening presence, but as an ambient fact, a background constant, the way the ocean is background in dreams about the sea. I would be dreaming of ordinary things, the office, the lunch cart, Devon across the table, and the sound would be beneath it, always beneath it, the way tinnitus is beneath everything else once you've become aware of it. I stopped sleeping more precisely. I stopped entering the depth of sleep where the dreaming lived. I stayed in the shallow water. If you are still with me, if you have not yet turned away from this account to the safer regions of your evening, write in the comments. The walls remember. Let me know I am not alone in this. Then come back. Come back immediately. Because the worst part has not arrived yet and I cannot tell it to an empty room. I began to wonder. God help me, to wonder whether the sound had always been there. Whether the man on the street, with his coat and his stillness and his terrible patient smile, was not introducing something into my life, but was simply the first occasion on which I had looked up from the noise of my ordinary existence long enough to hear what had always been present beneath it. I wondered this. I could not stop wondering it. And this is the revelation I have been working toward since the first word of this account. This is the thing I understood with the clarity of a bell struck in a silent room. Not that I was losing my mind, but that my mind, the particular, well-maintained, competent, evidence-based mind I had always trusted and calibrated and relied upon, had encountered something for which it had no architecture, no room, no vocabulary. And the absence of vocabulary, the pure blank silence where understanding should have been, was expanding. December arrived. The cold was genuine, the specific midwinter cold of a city that doesn't romanticize winter, that treats it as a problem to be borne. Marcus, I moved through it wrapped in layers that accomplished nothing about the deeper cold. The cold in the apartment that had no source. The cold that arrived at 2:17 and lifted not gradually but instantly at 2:22. As though a door had opened. As though something outside had concluded its business and departed. I called Devon every morning. I did not tell him everything. I told him enough. He kept suggesting the couch. I kept declining. The apartment, and I cannot explain this, the apartment had become the only place in which I could maintain the fiction of understanding. To leave it was to admit that the understanding was already gone. The guilt, and I had not anticipated the guilt, but the guilt was building. Not guilt about what I had done. Guilt about what I had failed to do, failed to leave when I should have left, failed to warn the others on the street. David Anscombe, who moved to Vermont. Helen Park, who transferred. Myril Tran, who stopped going outside before daylight. I had read their accounts. I had sat with their testimony and extracted facts from it, and I had done nothing with the facts except stockpile them. They had all moved, or stopped going outside, or gone quiet, and I had stayed. And the question I could not answer, could not shut out, was whether I had stayed because I needed to understand, or whether I had stayed because I had already been chosen. The words arrived in my mind fully formed at 2:15 a.m. on December 3rd, and I have not been able to remove them since. Not a choice I had made, a choice that had been made of me, by something that had been moving steadily down a street toward my window for 2 months with the patient, settled, sourceless expression of something that knew where it was going. But do not for one moment believe that you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And the reason I know this, the reason I cannot stop, is that it is still happening. Right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. But do not for one moment believe that you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And the reason I know this, the reason I cannot stop, is that it is still happening. Right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. Poe Right Arrow Lovecraft Bridge. And so my mind, what remained of it, turned at last to the question I had been circling for days. Not what had I seen, but what precisely had seen me. To characterize the phenomenon solely in terms of its effect upon the individual human observer, upon Marcus Webb, or upon the preceding witnesses cataloged in the records I have spent 18 months compiling, is to commit the fundamental error of all parochial thinking, the error of assuming that the measure of a thing is its effect upon those beings arrogant enough to consider themselves its primary concern. The entity that has operated in the Arden Avenue corridor, that operates with geological patience and absolute indifference in corridors and lanes and road ends and night market passages across the documented breadth of human occupation of this planet, is not, in any sense that the human mind can meaningfully grasp, interested in human beings. It does not hunt them. It does not hate them. It does not desire them. These are human emotional frameworks applied to a context that predates emotion, that predates, indeed, the very neurological structures in which emotion became possible. What it does, and I use the word does with the frank acknowledgement that it implies a kind of agency I am not certain this entity possesses. What it does is approach. This is the totality of its behavior. It is at a distance, then at a lesser distance, then at a lesser still. The approach is always measured, always patient, always calibrated with a precision that implies, and I record this observation with the detachment of someone who no longer has the luxury of dismissing uncomfortable implications. That implies prior knowledge of the target's schedule, the target's route, the target's most intimate geography. Dr. Irina Belovsky, researcher in anomalous behavioral patterns, Prague Institute of Cognitive Studies, 2019. I have reviewed 111 documented accounts spanning 2.5 centuries, and what I can tell you with methodological confidence is this: the entity does not make errors. Every approach is efficient. Every escalation is timed. If it were a human actor, we would call it surveillance, a comprehensive, patient, perfectly executed surveillance operation. But the temporal span of the accounts makes human actors impossible. What we are looking at is something that has been doing this, exactly this, with no variation longer than the institution of the city, longer than the institution of the record. When I showed my analysis to my department head, he suggested I take a leave of absence. I did. I have not returned. The reason is not exhaustion. The reason is that I know things now that I cannot unknow. This is the fact that exists at the foundation of Marcus Webb's account. The being that stood on Arden Avenue was not manifesting for the first time. It was not responding to Marcus Webb specifically. It was doing, with Marcus Webb, what it has done with James Alver in Edinburgh, and with the families of Dauphin County, and with Helen Park and David Anscombe and Myril Tran, and 11 other individuals in the same corridor. What it has done, in all likelihood, in the same geographic location, with prior occupants of the same buildings across every decade of their occupation. What it does not do, what it has never been recorded doing, is stop. I have spent considerable effort in this account attempting to describe the entity's appearance, and I have found, as every witness before me has found, as every researcher who has engaged with the primary documents has found, that the available vocabulary is structurally insufficient. This is not false modesty. This is not the rhetorical gesture of a narrator artificially withholding revelation for dramatic effect. The entity's observable appearance, the coat, the posture, the stillness, these are, at the level of coarse description, communicable. These are the proximate layer, the part of the phenomenon that exists within the range of ordinary human perception and can be processed by the ordinary human perceptual apparatus without permanent damage. Beyond that layer, the apparatus fails. What Marcus Webb saw from his second-floor window on the night of November 14th, the widening of the smile, the darkening of the eyes, these were not, I have come to understand, features of the entity itself. They were the consequence of a proximity threshold being crossed. At a sufficient distance, the entity presents a surface legible to human perception. It presents what can be processed: the coat, the posture, the smile, which is itself. I record this with the full acknowledgement of what it implies, not a smile. It is the nearest analog to a smile that can be generated by something entirely without a face. It is an impression in the surface of perception, a fold, a form that a perceiving mind translates involuntarily into the nearest available category. The smile is the mind's translation. What is actually there is something for which the mind has no category. When the entity crossed the proximity threshold, when it stood directly below Marcus Webb's window and looked up, the processing layer began to fail. The coat was still a coat. The posture was still a posture. But the face, the thing the mind had been translating as a face. Language ends here. I do not say this as rhetorical punctuation. I say it as a literal and measurable fact. Every witness who has observed the entity at close range, within 20 feet, within the radius where the proximate layer degrades, every such witness has subsequently reported an inability to describe what they saw beyond the threshold of that distance. Not unwillingness, not choice. A genuine, testable inability. The words are available. The syntactic structures are available. The memory, in some form, is available. The connection between the memory and the words does not hold. This is consistent with accounts separated by 2.5 centuries, across multiple languages, in witnesses whose only shared characteristic is that they were once in a position to see clearly. What lies at the center of the entity, beyond the proximate layer, beneath the fold in perception that the human mind reads as a smile, I cannot tell you. I have seen it. I know what it is with a certainty that the destroyed connection between knowledge and language has rendered permanently inexpressible. I can only tell you what knowing it has cost. The records I found in Edinburgh, and in the National Library of Wales, and in the special collections of the Universitätsbibliothek Frankfurt, and in a digitized pamphlet archive maintained by an academic at the University of Melbourne who ceased responding to correspondence in March 2021. The records contain, collectively, 147 individual accounts. Across those 147 accounts, every witness who observed the entity at the proximate distance, the close distance, the window distance, the standing at the foot of the steps distance, every single such witness experienced, in the days following the close observation, the same sequence of events: the sound in the room, the cold at the specific hour, the failures of ordinary mechanical objects and their unexplained repairs, the changed behavior of domesticated animals, the insomnia, the loss, gradual and irreversible, of the ability to believe fully in the solidity of the surrounding world. And after that sequence, in every account, in every language, across the full temporal span of the record, there is a final event. The accounts do not agree on its precise nature. The accounts, and I say this having read every word of every one of them, are not able to agree on its precise nature, because the accounts that describe it are incomplete. They end partway through the description. They stop mid-sentence. They stop mid-word. In 4 cases, the final document in a witnesses series is a single letter, occupying the center of an otherwise empty page, that may or may not be the beginning of a word, and may or may not be connected to the preceding documentation at all. What all the terminated accounts have in common: they were written in the window of time between the entities reaching the proximity threshold and the final event. They were written by people who knew, who had been in the position to understand what was coming, who were writing in the last available time, a record for whoever came next. This document is that record. I am Marcus Webb, and I have been writing this account from my apartment at 1147 Arden Avenue, and the entity is outside my door. Not on the street, not below the window, not at the foot of the stairs. At the end of my hallway, on this side of my locked front door. What you just heard was only the beginning. Lovecraft Wright Arrow Barker Bridge. Enough of the theoretical, enough of the academic distance. What was found in that room deserves to be described as it was, in full in light with nothing hidden. I want you to understand, before I proceed, the scale of the thing I am attempting to convey. Not the scale of the fear. Fear is human scale. Fear fits inside the body that experiences it. I want you to understand the scale of the entity itself, the scale of its existence relative to the existence of the beings it approaches, the scale specifically of its patience, of its capacity for duration, of the utter, annihilating meaninglessness. And I use that word precisely, not rhetorically, the utter meaninglessness of any individual human life and death and terror and suffering relative to the timeline within which this thing has operated. James Alver died in Edinburgh in 1743. The entity did not stop. It was in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania in 1977. It was on Arden Avenue in February 2019, and it has remained on Arden Avenue through December 2019. The 244 years between Edinburgh and Pennsylvania represent, on the timescale suggested by the archival record, a vanishingly small interval. The record suggests a presence in the geographic corridors of human settlement stretching back to the first written documentation of urban night walking, and the absence of documentation before a certain date is not, I would argue, evidence of absence. It is evidence only of an absence of records. It has been doing this since before we had words for it, since before we had cities for it to stand in. It has been standing in our settlements, moving toward our homes, for longer than civilization has existed to produce the concept of home. And this is what has broken something in me that I cannot repair. Here is what I know about the final event. It is not death. The 4 terminated accounts and the 10 other witnesses who disappeared from their documentation mid-sequence are not confirmed dead. The cases are open. The individuals are classified as missing. They were at home. The doors were locked. There were no signs of entry or struggle. They are simply stopped, gone. What has been described thus far represents only the outermost fragment of the truth, the portion that human language can approximate. What lies beneath that layer, what the deepest accounts suggest, is something for which no preparation is adequate. Nothing that follows can be unheard. You were warned. I had crossed a line, I had crossed it, and I had not known at the moment of crossing that there was a line to cross. The line was this: the moment I stopped asking what is outside and began asking what has it made of what is inside. The moment the investigation turned inward. The moment the external phenomenon ceased to be the subject of inquiry and became, instead, the occasion for the inquiry. The occasion, do you understand, for the only inquiry that ultimately matters, which is the inquiry into the investigator himself. What had it made of me? What had the accumulation, the sightings, the sound, the cold at 2:17, the documentation, the sleeplessness, the endless cross-referencing of accounts written by people who had been broken before me? What had all of this made of the person who, 6 weeks ago, had walked home from a bus stop with a podcast in his ears, thinking about a disappointing lunch cart and a cat who didn't like him. I was still him. I was still that person. I could verify it. I could still remember the specific quality of his contentment, the specific texture of his ordinary life, the way it had felt to stand at the kitchen window with a beer on a Wednesday night and feel something approaching genuine peace with the whole arrangement. But I was also not him. The person who could feel that peace was still present in me, the way a photograph is present in a house that has been damaged, the image intact, the frame intact, the glass unbroken, but in a house that was no longer the house the photograph had been hung in. I was obsessed. I use the word precisely. Not absorbed, not focused, not committed, obsessed in the original, clinical, pre-casual use of the word. Beset by an external force. Something outside me had laid claim to the whole of my attention, and I could not disengage it. I had stopped eating meals at meal times. I had stopped responding to Devon's calls with the same day. I had stopped going to work. I had sent emails. I had been plausible in the emails, but I had not been to the Prescott building in 9 days. Harold with the lunch cart had no idea. Patterson had no idea. Devon had, I suspected, some idea, but not the full one. The full one was this. I had become the thing at the window, not outside it, inside it. I was now the person at the window at 2:15 every night, standing to the side of the frame, watching the street for the shape in the amber light, and the watching had become. The watching was. I had crossed the line without ceremony, and I could not locate the place to cross back. The guilt arrived in the shape of a question. Had I made it worse by looking? This is the question I cannot lay down, cannot set aside, cannot examine from a sufficient distance to achieve objectivity, because there is no sufficient distance, because I am the subject of the inquiry, because the boundary between the observer and the observed has, in this case, in this particular and terrible case, long since dissolved. The accounts I had read, the historical accounts, the Edinburgh records, the Dauphin County files, did any of them involve a witness who, rather than departing the field of operation, had remained and watched, had documented obsessively, had spent sleepless nights at a window looking down at the entity rather than moving away from the window? I had found no such account. I was, as far as the record allowed me to determine, doing something novel, something the prior witnesses had not done, and I had done it for a reason, for the perfectly rational, evidence-based copy editor's reason that understanding the phenomenon was necessary before I could counter it, and I had been wrong. There was no counter. There had never been a counter. The witnesses who had departed and stayed silent had not been cowards. They had been survivors. They had, with some animal wisdom that preceded their ability to articulate it, understood the correct response. Remove yourself, be silent, be unremarkable, become inaccessible. I had done the opposite. I had made myself the most possible amount of available. I had stood at my window every night like a signal fire. I had stayed when every prior witness with the sense to survive had left. And now it was in my hallway. It had not come through the door was still locked. I had checked it 40 minutes ago when I became aware of its presence, and I had stood with my hand on the lock and felt the cold coming from the other side, and I had not opened the door, but it was there. The cold, the sound, both present and unmistakable on this side of the door, in the way that a sound heard through a wall is unmistakable. You know it's on the other side. You know you're separated from it by structure, and yet you also know, with the part of you that precedes every architectural theory of safety, that structure is not the relevant consideration. I had stopped fighting what I had become. I was the person sitting on the kitchen floor with his back to the wall that held the front door, writing this document, writing it with the specific urgency of a person who understands they have a finite window of time for the writing. I had become part of the darkness, not through any dramatic transformation, through staying, through watching, through the most ordinary mechanism in the world, persistence. I had persisted in the proximity of the thing, and the thing had persisted toward me, and eventually, inevitably, we had arrived at the same room. I have to tell you what I have done. It is not what you expect. I have not hurt anyone. I have not destroyed anything. The darkest truth I carry is quiet and small, and it is this. I knew. I knew at the latest on November 3rd, when the man moved from the Arden Mercer light to the Arden Hillcroft light, that this was real and serious and that I needed to leave. I did not leave. I told Devon I would come to the couch, and I packed a bag, and I stood at my door with the bag in my hand and Patterson in his carrier, and I chose to stay. I have spent 6 weeks constructing rational justifications for that choice. The need for documentation, the compulsion to understand, the researcher's responsibility to the record, and every one of those justifications is true, and none of them is the reason. The reason is that I had become, in the specific and horrible way a person can become something without noticing the transition, I had become interested in the entity, not frightened of it, interested. The fear had been present, yes, in the early weeks, and was present still in the body's language, the cold, the shaking hands, the refusal to go to the window directly. But beneath the fear, growing steadily beneath it and through it and around it, fascination. The researcher's fascination. The specific, terrible fascination of a person who has found a thing that has not been found before and cannot make himself put it down. I had been studying it. I had been, God help me, I had been looking forward to 2:17 a.m. in the way you look forward to the next chapter of the only book that has ever fully held you. That is the darkest truth. That is the sentence I have been avoiding. Not that I was followed, but that I had wanted to be followed long enough to understand it, and that understanding and the want had both been wrong. And I had paid with everything that made me the person who could sit at the kitchen window on a Wednesday night and feel something approaching peace. That person is still in here, somewhere still in here. The cold on the other side of the door is growing. Lovecraft Right Arrow Barker Bridge. Enough of the theoretical, enough of the academic distance. What was found in that room deserves to be described as it was, in full, in light, with nothing hidden. The door opened. Not from outside. I have to be precise about this. I have to be precise because precision is the only thing I have left that feels like control. It opened from inside. It opened because I opened it. Because at 2:16 a.m., with the cold pressing through the wood and the sound filling the apartment's air, and Patterson somewhere at the back of the bedroom making a sound I had never heard a cat make, I stood up from the kitchen floor, and I walked to the door, and I turned the lock, and I opened it. I turned on the hallway light first. I want you to know that. I flooded the space with light. There would be no shadow, no silhouette, no shape at the edge of perception that I could later rationalize into something ordinary. I opened the door into full light and I looked. He was there. The coat was dark wool, I can tell you that now that I am close enough to tell you heavy, belted at the waist, real fabric, real weight, real texture in the way that every material thing in the world has real texture if you are close enough to see it. His hands were at his sides. His posture was what it had always been, relaxed, upright, balanced, the posture of a person occupying space with absolute, unquestioned authority. The posture of something that has never been required to justify its presence in a room. His face. I will not spare you. I opened the door to see, and I am going to tell you what I saw. The structure of the face was human. Forehead, jaw, cheekbones, the architecture of a face was there, was all present and correctly arranged. The skin, if it was skin, was pale in the specific way that paleness ceases to be a complexion and becomes instead an absence of something. Not white. The absence of the thing that makes skin pink or brown or warm. The absence of blood, of breath, of the biological noise that announces a living thing. The eyes, here I will match what Marcus described from the window because the description from the window was accurate. Dark, not colored, dark, absent. The eyes were present as physical structures and absent as windows. They were there and nothing was behind them, and the nothing behind them was not emptiness. Emptiness would have been a relief. The nothing behind them was occupied. occupied by something that had no interest in being seen. And the smile that had been patient and settled and sourceless on a street at 300 feet. At 3 feet it was enormous, not in dimension, in presence, in the way that a quiet thing in a quiet room is louder than a loud thing in a loud place. The smile filled the doorway. The smile filled the apartment. The smile was the single most complete expression I had ever seen on a face, and what it expressed was not happiness, not threat, not triumph, not hunger. It expressed arrival. It had arrived. After all this time, after all this distance covered, after every amber streetlight and every measured approach and every calibrated degree of proximity, it had arrived. It was here. And the expression on its not face expressed this with the totality and the finality of a period at the end of a very long sentence. I want to tell you about its beauty. Not despite everything I have already said, because of it, inseparable from it. The horror and the beauty were a single substance, and I am not going to perform the polite editorial surgery that separates them, because that surgery would be a lie, and I have been lying in smaller ways throughout this account by omission, and I am done with it. It was beautiful. The coat up close was extraordinary in its construction, the weave of it visible now, some material with a depth and texture that absorbed the hallway light rather than reflecting it, that suggested warmth without providing it. The hands, I looked at the hands, were long and very still, and the stillness of them was the stillness of something that had no need for gesture, no need for the communicative movement of hands, because it had never needed to convince anyone of anything. The smell of it was cold and clean and old, not the cold of winter, the cold of rock exposed to no sun, the cold of the very deep places in the earth where nothing has ever lived, and underneath that, barely at the edge of what I could register, something sweet, something almost floral in the way that something with no biology and no chemistry could produce a scent. The mind, I think, reaching for the nearest category, the nearest available translation. It was fascinating. It was fascinating in the way that an abyss is fascinating when you are standing at its edge, not because you want to fall, but because the depth of it is genuinely extraordinary, because you are face to face with something on a scale your ordinary life gives you no preparation for. I understood why I had stayed. Standing there in my doorway, I understood at last and completely why I had not taken the bag in Patterson and gone to Devon's couch 6 weeks ago. I had been drawn here, not controlled. I don't think it controlled me. I don't think control is a concept it requires. I had been drawn here the way water is drawn to the lowest point in a landscape. The lowest point in my landscape was this doorway, this meeting, this precise full light examination of the thing that had been coming toward me since October. It was fascinating and it was horrible, and those were not competing descriptions. They were one description. And here is what I understood standing in my hallway, 2 feet from the entity. Here is the thing that was worse than fear. Understanding it was going to change me, not kill me, not take me. I looked at its face and its patient, arrived, magnificent smile, and I understood that the purpose of the whole approach, the whole measured, patient, years-long closing of distance was not acquisition, was not consumption, was not any category of violence. It wanted to be seen. It wanted to be seen by someone who would stay, who would look, who would not flinch or flee or file a report and move to Vermont. It wanted, with the entirety of whatever passed for wanting in something that had existed since before the concept of wanting, to be known by something capable of knowing. And God help me, I was that thing. I had made myself that thing. It stepped forward, across my threshold, into my apartment, into the full light of my hallway lamp, and then into the dimmer light of my front room, and it moved with the smooth, unhurried economy of something that has never been obstructed by anything and expects not to begin now. Patterson made that sound again from the bedroom. Not a yowl, not a hiss, something more fundamental than either, something from the frequency range below communicative cat sound, something the body makes when the body's most ancient alarm systems engage simultaneously. The entity moved to the center of my front room and stopped. It stood the way it had always stood, coat, posture balanced, unhurried. But inside, in the lit air of the room where I had eaten and read and watched television, and held the ordinary, beautiful, boring substance of my life, it was immense. The room had not changed dimensions. The entity had not changed. But the relationship between them had changed. The way the relationship between a space and everything in it changes when the center of gravity shifts. The room was no longer my room. It was the room where the entity was standing, and I was in it. And then it looked at me. Not in the direction I was standing, not toward me, at me, with the dark, absent eyes, with the full weight of whatever attention was possible for something that had no investment in the outcome of any human life. With the attention, and this is the thing I cannot stop thinking about, this is the wound that won't close, with the attention of something that recognized me. Not my face, not my name. Something beneath my face and beneath my name. Something so essentially me that I had never had occasion to know it existed, because it had never been addressed before by anything in my 33 years of being alive in this apartment in this city on this particular stretch of the world. It recognized it, it addressed it, without words, without gesture, without movement. And the recognized thing in me, the thing so deep I hadn't known it was there, opened. Like a door. This is the part that was edited out, cut from every version you have ever encountered, because someone decided you could not handle the truth of what was found in that place. They were trying to be kind. I am not going to be kind. You asked for the truth. Here it is. This is the part that was edited out, cut from every version you have ever encountered, because someone decided you could not handle the truth of what was found in that place. They were trying to be kind. I am not going to be kind. You asked for the truth. Here it is. What you just heard was only the beginning. Barker Right Arrow Masterton Bridge. That is what happened to the body. Now I will tell you what happened to the record. What remained when it left was this: a room, a lamp on a table, a cat visible in the bedroom doorway, sitting very still, watching the front room with an expression I had no vocabulary for. A photograph on the refrigerator, right side up. A drawer that opened smoothly. A man sitting on his front room floor with his back to the couch, awake in a way he had never been awake before. Not alert, not energized, nothing so simple as consciousness enhanced. Awake in the way a room is awake after a great noise has passed through it and left it changed in its acoustic properties, so that every subsequent sound in the room lands differently against walls that have been, at the molecular level, rearranged. The entity had been in my apartment for, I checked my phone, 14 minutes. I have no memory of more than 3 of them. The 3 I have are not sequential. They are isolated images like frames pulled from a film without context. 1. The entity standing in the center of the room, the coat, the fullness of the smile. 2. My own hand held out, not in supplication or in threat, in what? In offering, in introduction. I don't know. I cannot identify the gesture. It is a gesture I have never made before. 3. A sound, brief and complete, that I have been searching for an analogy for since the moment I heard it, and the nearest I have come is the sound of a tuning fork, but a tuning fork struck against the specific frequency of the world's oldest loneliness. That is not adequate. That is the best I have. The apartment was cold for 4 hours after it left. Not the cold of winter, not the cold of something foreign, the cold of a room that has been occupied by something whose temperature, whose essential energetic signature, is simply different from the temperature of human life. It dissipated by dawn. The apartment has been my temperature since. I am physically unharmed. I say this for the record because it will be asked. I am unharmed in every sense that can be verified by a physical examination. I ate breakfast. The coffee maker worked. Patterson came out of the bedroom at 8 and occupied his warm patch of carpet and looked at me with his standard amount of calculated indifference. The new terrible reality is this. I know what I know now. I cannot unknow it. And knowing it, being the person who knows it, feels from the inside like living in a room with a window that looks out onto an angle you can't unsee. Everything else in the room is the same. The window is just there, showing what it shows, always now part of the view. December 16th, 2019, 7:14 a.m. Patrol Officer Yolanda Hayes, 14th Precinct, filed the incident report at 7:14 a.m. on December 16th following a welfare check initiated by one Devin Marsh, who had been unable to reach Marcus Webb by phone or text for a period of 11 hours. The welfare check found Marcus Webb at his residence, physically uninjured, alert, oriented to person, place, and time. He told Officer Hayes that he had had a difficult night and had not heard his phone. He thanked her for coming. He appeared, in the officer's notation, calm in a way that seemed unusual for someone who had been the subject of welfare concerns. Devin Marsh filed no further welfare requests. In a recorded phone conversation he gave to this researcher in 2022, Marsh stated, "He was fine. He told me he was fine. He sounded fine. But he sounded fine in a way that was different from the way he had sounded fine before. I don't know how else to say it. He sounded like someone who had arrived somewhere." The incident report has a case number. It is on file. It connects, if anyone cared to make the connection, to 6 prior reports filed throughout the autumn of 2019. No detective was assigned. The case is technically open. The journalist Pete Ahern attempted to file a follow-up story on the Arden Avenue reports in January 2020. He was told by his editor that the story had no legs. He left the publication in February 2020 and has not returned to journalism. He lives in Portland. He did not agree to an interview for this record. Witness Devin Marsh, IT security specialist, 2022. "The last time I saw him, saw him in person, the real version of in person, not the phone calls, was Christmas. He had me over, he cooked. The apartment looked normal. Patterson was fine. And we sat there and talked. And I kept waiting for, I don't know, a sentence that would explain it, that would account for the difference I kept feeling in him. And the sentence never came. He just seemed settled, like he'd had a question answered, like the question had been a big one and the answer had been unexpected, but he'd made his peace with it." Devin Marsh moved to Seattle in 2021. He and Marcus Webb remain in contact by phone. He describes their conversations as normal. He pauses when saying it. He always pauses. The final report in the 14th Precinct's Arden Avenue corridor file was filed March 3, 2020. An unidentified male, dark coat, smiling, standing under the Arden Mercer streetlight. Reported by a new resident of 1103 Arden Avenue, a graduate student named James Cho. James Cho filed 4 more reports, then he stopped filing them. This is not isolated. This is not the story of one street in one city in 1 year. Toronto, Ontario, October 2021. 7 reports over a 6-week period. Same description. Detective Anya Voronova of the Toronto Police Service's 51 Division reviewed the reports and identified the pattern, the approach, the nightly increment of proximity, the 2:17 a.m. time stamp, and submitted a recommendation for an investigative task force. The recommendation was denied. 2 of the 7 reporting witnesses had moved from the affected corridor by December 2021. 1, a woman named Priya Dalal, 31, teacher, stopped leaving her apartment except during daylight hours and filed no further reports. Birmingham, England, February 2022. 11 reports in 9 weeks. A local paranormal research group attempted to document the figure using camera equipment. 3 members of the group set up in the affected street at 2 a.m. on 3 consecutive nights. On the 3rd night, 1 member, Thomas Waugh, 26, filed a report the following morning describing what he had captured on camera. The footage was reviewed by a journalist for a local online publication. The journalist described it as inconclusive. The footage has not been publicly released. Waugh declined all further comment on the subject. The research group disbanded. Osaka, Japan, June 2022. 4 reports over 3 weeks. All 4 witnesses described the same figure. All 4 noted the approach pattern. One witness, a convenience store manager who worked night shifts, noted that the figure appeared at 2:17 a.m. by local time every night for 14 consecutive nights, each time slightly closer to his store, and that on the 15th night the figure was standing at the store window looking in. The store manager called police. Police found no one outside the store when they arrived at 2:22 a.m. The store manager has not worked a night shift since. The most recent case is documented in a community forum post dated November 2nd of this year. The city is unnamed. The witness describes a figure, dark coat under a streetlight, smiling. Describes the approach pattern. Describes the 2:17 times stamp with a specific note. I've checked every night for 3 weeks now and it's always exactly 2:17. I don't know what that means. Describes proximity increasing. The post has no follow-up. The account has been active for 11 months, but has not posted since November 2nd. The date of last activity is 3 weeks ago. Helen Park agreed to speak to me for 4 minutes in September 2022. We spoke by phone. She was in the city she had transferred to in March 2019. She had not left it since. She worked day shifts only. She lived on the 14th floor, which she specified as relevant without explaining why. She told me the following. I am quoting it as precisely as the recording allows. Witness, Helen Park, charge nurse, September 2022. I want to talk about what happened after I moved, not what happened on the street. That's on record. I gave that to the police and I stand by every word of it. I want to talk about what happened after because that's the part that nobody records and nobody believes and nobody writes down. What happened after was nothing. I moved to a new city and I took a new job and I lived on the 14th floor and nothing happened. He didn't follow me. He didn't appear in the new city. I checked. I know how that sounds. I checked the street every night for a year. I set an alarm for 2:15 and went to the window and looked. Nothing. So the thing you need to understand, the thing that kept me up longer than the man on the street ever did, is what that tells you. It tells you he wasn't after me. I was never the point. The point was the corridor. The point was Arden Avenue. I moved and I was out of the geometry and he just found someone else on the street I'd left. And that person, whoever they were, whoever moved into my building after I left, I think about them. I think about them all the time. I hope they moved. I think some of them didn't. Helen Park ended the call after 4 minutes as promised. She has not responded to subsequent attempts at contact. She is, as far as this researcher can determine, living quietly and working days and thinking about Arden Avenue every single night at 2:15 a.m. Her last recorded words to me before she hung up. Don't go back there. Whatever you're writing, wherever you found me, whatever you think you need to see, don't go back to Arden Avenue after dark. The street hasn't changed. It's still the same street, but it's his street now. It was his street before any of us lived there. We just forgot. The Arden Avenue corridor, as of this writing, has been the subject of 31 documented police reports spanning 11 years. None of those reports have resulted in an identification. None have resulted in an arrest. None have been connected to each other in any official investigation. The corridor has a community policing file. The community policing file notes recurring concerns regarding unidentified individual. That notation has been in the file since 2011. It has not prompted an escalation. It has not prompted a formal investigation. It has not prompted anything except its own continued presence in a file that is technically accessible to anyone who knows to request it, and practically inaccessible to anyone who doesn't know it exists. 4 individuals who lived in the Arden Avenue corridor between 2011 and 2023 are listed in missing persons databases. None of the 4 were reported missing from the street. Each disappeared from their subsequent residence after leaving Arden Avenue. 3 cases remain open. One was closed as insufficient evidence in 2020. The case worker who closed it retired 6 months later. He did not give an exit interview. Nora Casson, the researcher who connected the 2019 Arden Avenue reports, was last publicly active in October 2022. Her Facebook post, which I have described, a photograph of the Arden Mercer light, a figure underneath it, no caption. Her academic affiliation as of October 2022, lapsed. Her home address, unconfirmed. Her last known telephone number, disconnected. Dr. Solomon Brecht, Comparative Mythology, Temple University, speaking in an undated recording found on a private research server, believed to be 2022 or 2023. I have one more thing to say and then I'm done with this. The accounts don't end. Every researcher who has compiled the accounts, as I have compiled the accounts, every person who has read the full breadth of the record and understood its implications, goes quiet eventually. And I used to think that was fear, self-protection, sensible withdrawal from something that was causing harm. Now I think it's different. Now I think the going quiet is the same as what the entity does. I think we reach a point of proximity, not physical proximity, evidential proximity, and the entity becomes aware of us. And then, whether we go to Vermont or change cities or stop answering the phone, it starts slowly, patiently to close the distance. I am 3 blocks from my house right now, and I am going to walk home, and I am not going to take the long way around the streetlight on the corner. I have spent 2 years being afraid of it, and I am done being afraid. I'm going to look at it when I pass. I'm going to look it directly in the face. This is the final recording associated with Dr. Solomon Brecht. He was reported missing in February 2023 by a colleague at Temple University. He has not been located. His wife told the reporting officer that the last thing he said to her, leaving for his walk, was, "I just want to see it clearly." The document that should not exist but does is the Community Policing File Notation from October 14, 2011, the first Arden Avenue report 8 years before Marcus Webb. The notation reads, "Unidentified male, dark coat, stationary, smiling, no action required. 8 years, 31 reports, 4 missing persons, no action required." The file is still open. The building at 1147 Arden Avenue has 12 units. As of this writing, 7 are occupied. Marcus Webb still lives in the second-floor apartment. He goes to work. He takes the bus. He walks home on Arden Avenue. He doesn't listen to podcasts anymore. He passes the Arden Mercer streetlight every night. Some nights it's empty, some nights it isn't. He doesn't file reports. He doesn't cross-reference accounts. He stopped researching in January 2020 and has not returned to it. He says he's fine. Devin says he seems fine. His new colleague at the insurance company, a woman named Brooke who took Dana Fritch's old desk, says he's nice, thoughtful, the kind of person who remembers your sister's name. Patterson died in March 2021. Old age. The vet said there was nothing concerning about it. Just a cat who had lived a full life and reached its end. Marcus was sad in the way you are sad when something has been with you through something difficult and now it's gone. He hasn't gotten another cat. He stands at the kitchen window sometimes in the evenings. Not at 2:17 a.m. Just in the evenings the way he always did, looking out at the street. He doesn't drink beer on weeknights anymore. He drinks tea. He says the beer was giving him poor sleep. The bathroom fan still doesn't work. He still hasn't called the landlord. The photograph on the refrigerator, him and Devin and Rachel at the 4th of July party, all 3 of them squinting and laughing, is right side up. Has been right side up since December 2019. Everything is in order. Everything is exactly as it has always been. On Tuesdays, around 3 in the afternoon, Marcus sometimes looks up from his work and goes very still, the way a person goes still when they're listening for something. His colleague Brooke has noticed this. She asked him once if he was all right. He said yes. He smiled. It wasn't the smile she expected. The entity on Arden Avenue is not finished. It is not idle. It is not waiting for Marcus Webb. It has finished with Marcus Webb in the sense that a tide finishes with a particular shore. The tide moves on, the shore remains altered. There are new residents in the Arden Avenue corridor. There are people who have moved into the building at 11:47 this year, and people who walk home from the bus on Riordan and turn left on Fuller and right on Arden, because that is the most direct route, and they have done it for 3 months, and it has always been fine. There are people who have looked up from their phones on a cold night and noticed a figure under the Arden Mercer light and thought, that's just a man on a street. There are people who have noted, with a vague and quickly suppressed unease, that the man is always there at the same time. There are people who have begun, without deciding to check the streetlight before they turn onto their block. The entity is not hurrying. It has never hurried. It stands in the amber light with its patient, ancient, magnificent, terrible stillness, and it smiles with the whole of its attention directed at the small, warm shape that walks toward it every night on its way to wherever home is. And it waits with a patience that makes a mockery of everything that has ever called itself patient in the history of the world. It will be a little closer tomorrow night, and a little closer still. And it will do this, exactly this, with no variation, with no hurry, with the full concentrated patience of something that was standing in corridors before the first corridor existed. It will do this for as long as there are corridors, and lights above corridors, and small warm shapes walking home beneath them, unaware of how old the dark between the lights truly is, and what has been standing in it since before their grandfathers' grandmothers were born. Humanity passes through this horror like shadows through a doorway, briefly, insignificantly, without residue. Our terror is noted by nothing. Our understanding changes nothing. The entity stands in the amber light. It is already a little closer to your house than it was last night. And I, who have seen it clearly, who have stood in the full light of my hallway at 2 in the morning and looked at the face behind the face and felt the thing in me that it addressed open like a lock finding its key. I carry what I know in the specific sealed room a person carries the worst thing they know, not locked away from themselves, but locked away from the rest of the world. The room is always present. The room is always within me. And in the room is the knowledge, and the knowledge is not a frightening thing anymore. This is the part I cannot explain to Devon or to anyone. This is the part that feels like the most important thing I have to say, and the part that no one will believe. The knowledge is not a frightening thing anymore. It is the loneliest thing in the world. To know what I know, to have been seen by what I was seen by, to have had the thing beneath your name addressed by something that has been addressing the things beneath names since before the concept of a name existed, is to be permanently, utterly, and unreachably alone in your understanding of the world you move through. I walk home on Arden Avenue. I pass the street light. Some nights it's empty. Some nights the shape is there and I look at it and it looks at me and neither of us is afraid. I am the only person in the world who knows that the smile means I found you. And every night at 2:17 a.m. I lie awake in the apartment where it stood, listening to the street, thinking. Somewhere right now there is a person walking home from a bus stop under amber lights, listening to a podcast, thinking about lunch and a cat who doesn't like them, and they have just looked up and seen a figure under a street light, and they are thinking just a man, just an insomniac, nothing to worry about, and the figure is already closer than it was last night, and will be closer still tomorrow, and will keep closing the distance with its patient, sourceless, magnificent, ancient smile until the night it crosses the threshold. And you will not know it is coming until the night you check the time, and the time is 2:17, and the shape at the end of your street is wearing the same dark coat it has always worn, and it is smiling at you specifically.